The dust kicked up in small clouds as Sarah Grayson limped through the crowded market square of St. Louis, Missouri, her right leg dragging slightly behind her left, and she could feel every pair of eyes following her movement like vultures circling wounded prey. It was August 1872, and the summer heat pressed down on the bustling river town with suffocating weight, but Sarah had learned long ago to ignore both the weather and the stares. She clutched her woven basket tighter against her hip, focusing on the vendors calling out their wares rather than the whispers that followed in her wake. "Look at that poor thing," someone muttered behind a hand. "What a shame," another voice echoed. Sarah's jaw tightened, but she kept her chin up. She had been limping since the wagon accident 3 years ago when she was only 19 years old. The wheel had rolled over her right leg, crushing bone and muscle, and though the doctor had saved the limb, it had never healed quite right. Her father had died in that same accident, leaving her with nothing but a small cabin on the outskirts of town, and a limp that marked her as damaged goods in the eyes of every potential suitor within 50 miles. She moved between the stalls, selecting vegetables with careful consideration. Every penny mattered when you were a woman alone, taking in mending and laundry to survive. The tomatoes looked good today, and she reached for 3 of them, counting out her coins with practiced efficiency. "That will be 8 cents, the vendor said, his eyes kind. Mr. Peterson had always been decent to her, never treating her differently because of her leg. Sarah handed over the money and placed the tomatoes carefully in her basket. As she turned to leave, her foot caught on an uneven cobblestone, and she stumbled forward with a sharp gasp. Strong hands caught her before she could fall, steadying her with a grip that was both gentle and impossibly firm. "Easy there," a deep voice rumbled above her. Sarah looked up and found herself staring into the most striking pair of blue eyes she had ever seen. The man towering over her had to be well over 6 feet tall, with shoulders so broad they seemed to block out the sun. His hair fell past his collar in waves of dark brown, and his face was all hard angles and weathered tan, the kind of face that came from years spent outdoors. His arms, bare beneath a rolled-up flannel shirt, were corded with muscle that spoke of hard labor and harder living. "Thank you," Sarah managed, her voice coming out breathier than she intended. She tried to step back, but his hands remained on her arms, steadying her. "You hurt?" he asked, his eyes scanning her face with an intensity that made her heart flutter. "No, I am fine. Just clumsy." She felt her cheeks heat with embarrassment. He released her slowly, as if making sure she truly had her balance before letting go. "Did not look like clumsy to me. Looked like the city needs to fix their damn streets." Sarah blinked at his bluntness, then felt a smile tugging at her lips despite herself. "Well, yes, that too." A group of women nearby had stopped their shopping to stare, and Sarah could see them whispering behind their fans. She recognized Mrs. Hartwell and her daughter, 2 of the worst gossips in St. Louis. Mrs. Hartwell's eyes narrowed as she took in Sarah's disheveled state and the massive stranger standing so close to her. "She has got a limp, Mrs. Hartwell said to her daughter, her voice intentionally loud enough to carry. "That poor girl. Such a burden she must be to everyone around her." The words hit Sarah like a slap, even though she had heard similar comments 100 times before. She felt her face flush hot with shame and anger, and she ducked her head, ready to hurry away as fast as her uneven gait would allow. But the mountain man stepped in front of her, blocking her path. His jaw had gone tight, and when he spoke, his voice carried across the market square with the force of thunder. "Then I will walk slower and hold her hand tight." The entire square seemed to fall silent. Sarah's eyes went wide with shock as the man reached down and took her hand in his his calloused palm completely engulfing her smaller fingers. He looked directly at Mrs. Hartwell with an expression that could have frozen fire. "Got a problem with that, madam?" he asked, his tone leaving no doubt that he genuinely did not care if she did. Mrs. Hartwell sputtered, her face turning an unflattering shade of purple. Her daughter tugged at her sleeve, and the two women hurried away, shooting scandalized looks over their shoulders. Sarah stood frozen, staring at the place where her hand disappeared into his. She could feel the warmth of his skin, the roughness of old calluses, the surprising gentleness of his grip. Her heart was pounding so hard she was certain he must be able to hear it. "You did not have to do that," she whispered. He looked down at her and his expression softened slightly. "Yeah, I did. Cannot stand people who kick others when they are down." He paused, then added, "Name is Bennett Colter. Most folks call me Ben." "Sarah Grayson." She was acutely aware that he still held her hand, and that people were definitely staring now. "I should go." "Let me walk you home," Ben said. It was not really a question. Sarah knew she should refuse. She did not know this man, and accepting his escort would only fuel more gossip. But something in his eyes made her feel safe in a way she had not felt since before her father died. "All right," she heard herself say. They walked through the streets of St. Louis together, Ben matching his long strides to her slower pace without any sign of impatience. He still held her hand, and Sarah found herself grateful for the support. The cobblestones were treacherous for her, and having something solid to lean on made the journey easier. "How long you been in St. Louis?" she asked, partly to break the silence and partly because she was genuinely curious. He did not look like the kind of man who belonged in a city, even one as rough-edged as this frontier town. "Just got in yesterday," Ben replied. "Been up in the mountains, trapping beaver and bear. Came down to trade my furs and stock up on supplies before winter." "You are a trapper." That explained the muscles, the weathered skin, the way he moved with such confidence. Mountain men were a breed apart, men who lived by their wits and their strength in the wilderness. "Have been for about 8 years now, since I was 18. He glanced at her. "Gets lonely sometimes, but I prefer it to being crowded in with a bunch of people." Sarah could understand that. After living alone for 3 years, she had grown accustomed to solitude. "Where are you from originally?" "Pennsylvania." "My pa had a farm there, but he drank himself to death when I was 16. My ma followed him a year later, just gave up, I think. I tried to keep the farm going, but the bank took it eventually. Figured I might as well head west and make my own way." There was no self-pity in his voice, just a statement of facts. Sarah recognized that tone because she used it herself when talking about her own past. "My father died in the accident that gave me this," she said, gesturing to her leg. "Wagon wheel broke on a hill. I was thrown clear, but my leg was caught. My father tried to stop the wagon from rolling, but—" She trailed off, the memory still painful even after 3 years. Ben's hand tightened slightly on hers. "That is a hell of a thing to survive. Sometimes I wonder if surviving was the harder choice." The words slipped out before she could stop them, and Sarah immediately regretted her honesty. She never talked about this with anyone, but Ben just nodded as if he understood completely. "I have thought that myself a time or two. But then, I see something like a sunrise over the mountains or a hawk riding the wind currents, and I figure maybe there is still good reason to be here." They had reached the edge of town, where the buildings gave way to scattered cabins and farmland. Sarah's small house sat at the end of a dirt lane, its whitewashed walls badly in need of fresh paint. The vegetable garden out front was neat and well tended, and chickens pecked in the yard. "This is me," Sarah said softly. Ben looked at the cabin for a long moment. "You live here alone?" "Yes. I take in washing and mending to get by." He frowned, his eyes scanning the property. "That cannot be easy, doing that kind of work with your leg." Sarah bristled slightly, pulling her hand from his. "I manage just fine, thank you. I do not need anyone's pity." "Was not offering pity," Ben said mildly. "Was offering respect. Takes guts to make it on your own out here, especially for a woman. Takes even more when you are dealing with injury." His words deflated her defensive anger. She was so used to condescension that genuine respect caught her off guard. "I am sorry. I should not have snapped at you, and thank you for what you did in the market. No one has ever stood up for me like that before." Ben shrugged, but there was something in his eyes that made her breath catch. "Like I said, I cannot stand bullies." And that woman was being cruel for no good reason. He hesitated, then added, "Would you mind if I called on you tomorrow? I would like to see you again if you are willing." Sarah's heart leaped into her throat. Men did not call on her. Men barely looked at her twice, not with her damaged leg and her poverty. Why? The question came out sharper than she intended, but she needed to know. "Because you are the first interesting person I have met in this city," Ben said simply. "Because you have got fire in your eyes and strength in your spine. Because when you smile, which you have not done nearly enough, it makes your whole face light up. That enough reasons?" Sarah felt tears prickling at her eyes, and she blinked them back fiercely. "I am not used to kindness." "Then maybe it is time you got used to it." Ben smiled, and it transformed his hard face into something almost boyish. "So, tomorrow." "Tomorrow," Sarah agreed, her voice barely above a whisper. Ben tipped his hat to her and turned to leave, his long strides eating up the ground. Sarah watched him go, her hand still tingling from where he had held it. She had no idea what she had just agreed to, but for the first time in 3 years, she felt something other than resigned despair. She felt hope. The next morning, Sarah woke before dawn as always, her leg aching from yesterday's walk into town. She went through her usual routine of feeding the chickens, drawing water from the well, and starting a fire in the stove. But instead of immediately beginning her washing work, she found herself standing in front of the small mirror in her bedroom, studying her reflection with critical eyes. She was 22 years old, though sometimes she felt ancient. Her dark blonde hair fell past her shoulders in waves that never quite behaved, and her face was too thin, her cheekbones too prominent from years of stretching every meal as far as it would go. But her eyes were a clear gray-green, and her skin, though pale, was smooth. She was not beautiful, she knew that, but maybe she was not entirely unfortunate-looking either. The thought made her feel foolish. What did it matter what she looked like? Ben Colter was just being kind, probably out of pity despite his words to the contrary. He would realize soon enough that she was not worth his time, and he would disappear back into his mountains where he belonged. But even as she tried to convince herself of this, she found herself braiding her hair with extra care and putting on her best dress, a simple blue cotton that brought out the color of her eyes. She was hanging washing on the line when Ben appeared around noon, leading a massive horse loaded with supplies. He had cleaned up since yesterday, his hair damp and combed back, his face freshly shaved. He wore clean trousers and a shirt that strained across his broad shoulders, and Sarah's mouth went suddenly dry at the sight of him. "Afternoon," Ben called out as he approached. "Hope I am not disturbing your work." "No, I was just finishing." Sarah wiped her damp hands on her apron, suddenly nervous. "You did not have to come all the way out here." "Wanted to." Ben tied his horse to the fence post and walked over to where she stood. In the bright sunlight, she could see that his eyes were the blue of a summer sky, with little flecks of gray around the pupils. "Thought maybe we could talk some, get to know each other. If you have got time, that is." Sarah glanced at the washing still in her basket. She should finish it, should not waste valuable working time on frivolous things. But when she looked back at Ben, standing there with such open hopefulness on his face, she found herself nodding. "I have time. Would you like some coffee? It is not fancy, but it is hot." "Sounds perfect." They sat on the small porch outside her cabin, Sarah in her father's old rocking chair and Ben on the steps, his long legs stretched out in front of him. The coffee was indeed not fancy, but Ben drank it without complaint, and they fell into an easy conversation that surprised them both. Ben told her about life in the mountains, about the harsh winters when snow piled 10 feet high and the only sound was the wind through the pines. He talked about tracking animals through the wilderness, about the satisfaction of setting a perfect trap line, about the bone-deep loneliness that sometimes threatened to swallow him whole during the long, dark months. Sarah told him about her childhood, about her mother who had died of fever when she was only 8, about her father who had been a freighter hauling goods between St. Louis and the smaller settlements to the west. She talked about learning to cook and keep house at such a young age, about the accident that had killed her father and shattered her leg, about the slow, painful recovery, and the even more painful realization that her entire future had changed in an instant. "Doctor said I was lucky to keep the leg," Sarah said quietly, staring into her coffee cup. "Said he had considered cutting it off, but infection never set in and the bone eventually healed, just not straight. I can walk after a fashion, just not the way I used to." "You ever try to leave St. Louis? Go somewhere people do not know you, do not have those judgments already formed?" Ben asked. "With what money? And go where? At least here I have my home, small as it is. I have work, even if it barely keeps me fed. Out there." She gestured vaguely toward the west. "Out there I would just be another crippled woman with no prospects and no protection." Ben was silent for a long moment, his jaw working as if he was chewing over his words before speaking them. Finally, he said, "You are not crippled. You are injured, and there is a difference. Crippled means broken beyond use. You are still standing, still working, still surviving on your own. That is not broken. That is strong as hell." Sarah felt her throat tighten with emotion. "You keep saying things like that, because they are true." Ben set his coffee cup down and looked at her directly. "Sarah, I do not know what your experience has been with men in this town, but I get the feeling it has not been good. I get the feeling people have been treating you like you are less than what you are because of your leg. Am I wrong?" She shook her head, not trusting her voice. "Then let me be clear about something. I am not here because I feel sorry for you. I am not here because I think you need saving or because I am doing some good deed for the day. I am here because yesterday, when I caught you from falling, I looked into your eyes and saw someone I wanted to know better. The fact that you walk with a limp does not change that. If anything, it makes me respect you more, because I know you have been through hell and you are still fighting." "I do not understand why," Sarah whispered. "I am not pretty or rich or talented at anything special. I am just a woman with a bad leg and a dying vegetable garden." Ben stood and crossed to where she sat. He knelt down in front of her chair, bringing himself to eye level, and took both her hands in his. "You want to know what I see when I look at you? I see a survivor. I see someone who could have given up 3 years ago but chose to keep going instead. I see intelligence in your eyes and humor in the way your mouth quirks when you are trying not to smile. I see someone who feeds her chickens before she feeds herself, because that is what responsible people do. I see someone worth knowing, Sarah Grayson. And if you will let me, I would like to spend my time in St. Louis getting to know you better." Sarah's hands trembled in his. "You are leaving when winter comes." "I am." He did not lie to her, and she appreciated that. But that is still 3 months away. A lot can happen in 3 months. What happens after? When you go back to your mountains and I stay here? The question hurt to ask, but she needed to know what she was getting into. Ben's grip tightened on her hands. I do not know. I have never felt like this about anyone before, so I do not have answers. But I know I would regret it for the rest of my life if I did not at least try to see where this goes. Would not you? He was right, and Sarah knew it. She could send him away now, protect her heart, go back to her safe, lonely existence. Or she could take a chance, knowing it would probably end in heartbreak, but at least she would have something real and honest for once in her life. Yes, she said finally. Yes, I would regret it. Ben's face broke into a grin that made him look years younger. So we try. Over the next few weeks, Ben became a constant presence in Sarah's life. He came by every day, usually in the afternoon when the heat was at its worst, and Sarah's leg ached the fiercest. He would help her finish whatever work she had left, hauling water or chopping wood or hanging the heavier pieces of washing. Then they would sit together and talk, sometimes for hours. Sarah learned that Ben could read, which was rarer than she would have expected for a mountain man. His mother had been a schoolteacher before she married, and she had insisted on educating her son properly. Ben, in turn, taught Sarah to identify animal tracks in the dirt and how to tell if rain was coming by the way the wind shifted. He also insisted on walking with her whenever she needed to go into town. The first time they appeared together at the market, the gossip mill went into overdrive. Sarah heard the whispers, saw the scandalized looks, but with Ben's solid presence beside her and his hand clasping hers, she found she did not care nearly as much as she once had. Mrs. Hartwell made the mistake of commenting loudly about impropriety and unmarried women keeping company with wild men. Ben simply looked at her and said, "Madam, with all due respect, mind your own business." The directness of it left the woman speechless, and Sarah had to hide her smile behind her hand, but it was not all smooth going. One evening, about a month into their courtship, they were walking along the river when a group of young men called out to them. Sarah recognized them as some of the boys who used to tease her in the market, though they had mostly left her alone lately. "Hey, Colter," one of them shouted, a lanky kid named Jack Davis. "What you doing wasting your time with a cripple? Plenty of whole women in this town who would be happy for your attention." Sarah felt her face burn with shame, and she tried to pull her hand from Ben's, wanting to hide. But he held on tight, and when he turned to face the young men, his expression was colder than a winter storm. "You got something you want to say to me?" Ben asked quietly. The tone of his voice made all four of the young men take a step back. "Just saying it is strange is all," Jack mumbled, his bravado fading fast. "Woman like that, what is the point?" Ben moved so fast Sarah barely saw it. One moment he was standing beside her, the next he had Jack by the front of his shirt, lifting him half off the ground. The other three boys scattered like startled birds. "The point," Ben said, his voice deadly calm, "is that Sarah is worth 10 of you on your best day. The point is that she has more courage in her little finger than you have got in your whole body. The point is that if I ever hear you disrespecting her again, I am going to throw you in that river and let you swim back to whatever hole you crawled out of. We clear?" Jack nodded frantically, his face pale. Ben released him with a slight push, and the young man stumbled backward, nearly falling. He scrambled to his feet and ran after his friends without looking back. Ben turned back to Sarah, his expression softening immediately. "You all right?" Sarah was shaking, but not from fear. She was overwhelmed with a rush of feeling so powerful it nearly brought her to her knees. No one had ever defended her like that. No one had ever made her feel so valued, so worth protecting. "Ben," she whispered, and then she was in his arms, her face pressed against his chest as tears streamed down her cheeks. He held her carefully, one hand cradling the back of her head while the other wrapped around her waist. "Hey now, it is all right. They are gone. They will not bother you again." "It is not that." Sarah pulled back enough to look up at him, her eyes shining with tears. "It is that no one has ever cared enough to do what you just did. No one has ever made me feel like I matter." Ben's expression turned fierce. "You matter, Sarah. You matter to me more than I know how to put into words." He cupped her face in his hands, his thumbs gently wiping away her tears. "I am falling in love with you. I know it is fast. I know we have only known each other a few weeks, but I cannot help how I feel." Sarah's breath caught in her throat. "Ben, she swallowed hard. "I am falling in love with you too, but you are leaving. You have to go back to your mountains when winter comes, and I will be here, and I do not know how to do this when it is all going to end." "What if it did not have to end?" Ben asked softly. "What do you mean?" He took a deep breath, and Sarah could see he was nervous, which was somehow endearing on such a large, confident man. "Come with me, up to the mountains, be my wife." Sarah's heart stopped. "What? I know it is crazy, I know we barely know each other. But Sarah, I have been alone up there for 8 years, and I never once felt lonely enough to want to change that. Until now. Until you." He pulled her closer, his eyes boring into hers with desperate intensity. "I've got a cabin up in the Medicine Bow Range in Wyoming Territory. It is rough living, I will not lie about that. Winters are harsh and supplies are limited, and it is just the two of us for months at a time. But it is beautiful up there, Sarah. So beautiful it hurts sometimes, and I could take care of you. You would never have to scrub another person's laundry or worry about making rent. You would never have to deal with people like Mrs. Hartwell or those boys ever again. Ben, I cannot just leave everything I know." But even as she said it, Sarah was thinking about what she would actually be leaving. A falling down cabin. Backbreaking work that barely paid enough to survive. A town full of people who either pitied her or looked down on her. What was she really giving up? "I am not asking you to decide right now," Ben said. "Think about it. Take your time. But Sarah, please consider it. Consider a life where you are wanted and loved and protected. Consider a life where your leg does not matter to anyone but the two of us. Consider a life with me." Sarah looked up into his eyes and saw her future written there. It was terrifying and exhilarating and completely insane. And yet, standing there in the circle of his arms with the river flowing past them and the setting sun painting the sky gold and crimson, it was also the easiest decision she had ever made. "Yes," she whispered. "Yes, I will come with you. I will be your wife." Ben let out a whoop of joy that startled a flock of birds from a nearby tree. He lifted Sarah clear off her feet, spinning her in a circle while she laughed, her heart soaring higher than she had ever thought possible. When he set her down again, he kissed her for the first time, his lips gentle and warm and full of promise. They were married 3 weeks later in a simple ceremony performed by the preacher at the small church on the edge of town. Sarah wore a dress she had sewn herself from fabric Ben insisted on buying, pale yellow cotton that made her look like captured sunlight. Ben wore his best clothes, his hair neatly trimmed and his face clean-shaven, looking both civilized and utterly wild at the same time. There were only a handful of witnesses. The preacher, his wife, Mr. Peterson from the market who had always been kind to Sarah, and a few other townspeople who had shown her decency over the years. Mrs. Hartwell and her crowd were notably absent, which suited Sarah just fine. When the preacher pronounced them man and wife, Ben kissed her with such tenderness that Sarah felt tears spring to her eyes. She was married. She was wanted. She was loved. After 3 years of grinding loneliness and pain, she had found someone who looked at her and saw not a burden but a gift. They spent their wedding night in a room at the boarding house in town, a luxury Ben insisted on. He was gentle with Sarah, patient and careful, making sure she felt safe and cherished. When they finally came together as husband and wife, Sarah understood for the first time what it meant to be truly connected to another person, body and soul. Afterward, they lay tangled together in the narrow bed, Sarah's head resting on Ben's broad chest while his fingers traced lazy patterns on her bare shoulder. "Are you scared?" Ben asked quietly. "About heading into the mountains." "Terrified," Sarah admitted, "but also excited. Is that strange?" "Not to me. That is how I felt the first time I went into the wilderness on my own, scared but eager to see what was waiting for me." He pressed a kiss to the top of her head. "I will take care of you, Sarah, I swear it. You will never regret choosing me." "I know," Sarah said, and she meant it. They spent the next 2 weeks preparing for the journey. Ben sold the cabin and its contents, putting the money in a bank account in Sarah's name in case of emergency. They bought supplies: flour, salt, sugar, coffee, fabric for sewing, needles and thread, seeds for a garden, medicine, ammunition for Ben's rifle. They packed everything onto 2 sturdy mules along with Ben's horse. The morning they left St. Louis, Sarah took one last look at the town that had been her home for all 22 years of her life. She felt a pang of something that might have been regret or might have been nostalgia, but it passed quickly. Whatever she was leaving behind was nothing compared to what she was gaining. Ben helped her mount one of the gentler horses he had purchased specifically for her, making sure she was comfortable despite her leg. "We will take it slow," he promised. "If you need to stop and rest, you just say so. We have got plenty of time." The journey to Wyoming Territory took nearly 2 months. They traveled slowly, mindful of Sarah's leg which tired easily from the unaccustomed riding. Ben was endlessly patient, never once showing frustration with their pace. They camped under the stars, Ben teaching Sarah how to build a proper fire and cook over open flames. He showed her how to identify edible plants and which water sources were safe to drink from. Sarah had never been outside of Missouri in her life, and the vastness of the land astounded her. They crossed the Kansas plains, wide open spaces that seemed to stretch forever under an endless sky. Then they pushed north into Nebraska, following the Platte River west. The landscape changed gradually, becoming more rugged and wild with each passing day. Sarah's leg ached constantly from the riding, but she refused to complain. She had chosen this path and she would see it through. Ben noticed anyway, of course. He always noticed. He would help her down from her horse each evening and massage the cramped muscles, his strong hands working out the knots with surprising gentleness. At night, they would lie together in their bedroll, Sarah tucked against Ben's side while he pointed out constellations and told her stories about his years in the mountains. He talked about the wildlife he had encountered, bears and mountain lions and wolves. He described the way morning fog looked rising from a mountain lake, how the aspens turned gold in the fall, how the first snow of winter felt like a benediction after the long, hot summer. Sarah listened and dreamed and fell more deeply in love with this man who had appeared in her life like an answer to a prayer. She had not known she was praying. They reached Wyoming Territory in late October, when the aspens were indeed turning gold and the air had taken on the sharp bite of approaching winter. The Medicine Bow Range rose before them like a wall of stone and pine, majestic and intimidating in equal measure. "It is up there," Ben said, pointing toward the mountains. "Another 3 days of riding, maybe 4 at our pace. The cabin is in a valley, protected on 3 sides by ridges. There is a creek that runs year-round and good hunting nearby." Sarah stared at those mountains and felt a flutter of real fear. They were so remote, so far from any kind of civilization. What if she could not handle it? What if her leg got worse in the harsh conditions? What if something happened to Ben and she was left alone up there? But when she looked at her husband, saw the love and excitement shining in his eyes, she pushed the fear down. She had made her choice. She would live with it, whatever came. The climb into the mountains was the hardest thing Sarah had ever done. The trails were steep and rocky, challenging even for experienced riders. Her horse picked its way carefully upward while Ben led the way on his larger mount, the pack mules trailing behind. Sarah's legs screamed in protest at the constant shifting balance required to stay in the saddle on such treacherous terrain. On the third day, they reached a high pass where snow already dusted the ground. The air was thin and cold, and Sarah could see her breath in white puffs. But the view from that pass stole every thought from her mind. Spread out before them was a valley so perfect it looked like something from a painting. Pine forests cloaked the slopes in deep green, broken by gold where the aspens clustered. A silver ribbon of creek wound through the center of the valley, and at the far end, nestled against a protective ridge, Sarah could just make out a small cabin. "That is home," Ben said softly, pulling his horse alongside hers. "What do you think?" "It is beautiful," Sarah breathed, and she meant it. The beauty was wild and untamed, nothing like the civilized prettiness of a town garden, but it called to something deep in her soul. They descended into the valley as the sun began to set, painting the sky in shades of pink and orange. By the time they reached the cabin, full darkness had fallen, and stars blazed overhead in a sky unobstructed by city lights. Ben helped Sarah down from her horse, and she nearly collapsed when her feet hit the ground. Her leg had gone completely numb from the long ride. Ben caught her easily, lifting her into his arms. "I have got you," he murmured, carrying her toward the cabin. "Let me get a fire started and get you warm, then I will take care of the animals." The cabin was a single room, roughly 20 feet square, with a stone fireplace taking up most of one wall. There was a bed frame with a rope lattice that would need a mattress, a rough-hewn table with 2 chairs, some shelves, and a few cooking implements. It was primitive by any standard, but it was solidly built with thick log walls and a sturdy roof. Ben settled Sarah in one of the chairs and quickly got a fire going. The warmth felt like a blessing after the cold mountain air. Once he was satisfied that she was comfortable, he went back out to deal with the horses and mules. Sarah sat alone in the cabin and tried to process the reality of her situation. This was her home now. These mountains were her world. And the man outside tending to the animals was her entire support system. It was terrifying. It was also oddly freeing. Ben came back in carrying their bedrolls and some supplies. "I will get the rest of the gear unloaded tomorrow. Tonight, let us just eat something and rest. You must be exhausted." He cooked a simple meal of beans and salt pork while Sarah watched, learning the layout of her new kitchen. They ate in companionable silence, both too tired for much conversation. Afterward, Ben spread their bedroll on the bed frame, and they collapsed into it together. Sarah's last thought before sleep claimed her was that, despite the fear and the pain and the uncertainty, she was exactly where she was supposed to be. The next few weeks were an education in mountain living. Sarah learned how to keep the fire going all night so they would not freeze in their sleep. She learned how to conserve water when the creek was far enough away that every trip was an expedition. She learned how to cook with limited ingredients and how to make soap from lye and fat. She learned how to identify animal sounds in the night and which ones meant danger. Her leg was a constant challenge. The cold made it ache worse than it ever had in Missouri, and the altitude made her short of breath. But Ben had been right about one thing. Up here, her limp did not matter. There was no one to see it, no one to judge her for it. She could move at her own pace without worrying about holding anyone up or being a burden. Ben was an attentive husband and an excellent teacher. He showed her how to cure meat and store vegetables in the root cellar he had dug beneath the cabin floor. He taught her to shoot his rifle, insisting she needed to be able to defend herself if anything ever happened to him. He helped her plant a late garden that would hopefully produce something before the first hard freeze. At night, they would lie together in their bed, wrapped in furs and blankets, talking about everything and nothing. Sarah told Ben about her childhood, about the mother she barely remembered and the father she missed every day. Ben shared more about his own past, about the pain of losing his family and the freedom he had found in the wilderness. They made love often, discovering each other's bodies with growing confidence and tenderness. Ben was always careful with Sarah's leg, making sure she was comfortable, adjusting their positions to accommodate her limitations. But he also made her feel desired in a way she had never experienced before. With him, she was not damaged or broken. She was beautiful and wanted and whole. The first snow came in mid-November, a light dusting that melted by noon. But it was a warning of what was to come. Ben began working longer hours, cutting firewood and hunting game to stock their supplies for the winter. Sarah helped as much as she could, drying meat and gathering the last of the edible plants before everything froze solid. One evening, Ben came back from checking his trap line with a troubled expression. Sarah knew him well enough by now to recognize when something was wrong. "What is it?" she asked, setting down the shirt she was mending. "Found tracks up near the North Ridge," Ben said slowly. "Big cat. Mountain lion, looks like. It has been sniffing around the cabin." Sarah felt her stomach drop. She had heard mountain lions screaming in the night, an eerie sound like a woman crying. The thought of one hunting near their home was terrifying. "What do we do?" "I will hunt it tomorrow." Cannot have a predator that comfortable around the cabin, especially not with winter coming. They get desperate when food is scarce. Ben came over and knelt in front of her chair, taking her hands. "I need you to promise me something. While I am gone tomorrow, you stay inside with the rifle loaded. If you see that cat or hear anything unusual, you shoot first and ask questions later. Promise me, Sarah." "I promise." Sarah gripped his hands tightly. "But Ben, please be careful. I cannot lose you." "You will not lose me," he said firmly. "I have been tracking big cats since I was a boy. I know what I am doing." The next morning dawned cold and clear. Ben loaded his rifle, kissed Sarah thoroughly, and headed out into the forest. Sarah watched him go with her heart in her throat, then barred the door and settled in to wait. The hours crawled by with agonizing slowness. Sarah tried to keep herself busy with mending and cooking, but her ears were tuned to every sound outside. The wind in the pines sounded like footsteps. A bird's call made her jump. She kept the rifle within arm's reach at all times. It was mid-afternoon when she heard the shot, a single crack that echoed across the valley. Then nothing. Silence pressed down on the cabin like a physical weight. Sarah waited, counting her heartbeats, her hands clenched so tight her nails bit into her palms. Please, she prayed to whatever God might be listening. Please let him be all right. An eternity later she heard footsteps approaching the cabin. Heavy, steady footsteps. She grabbed the rifle and aimed it at the door, her hands shaking. "Sarah, it is me," Ben's voice called out. "I am all right. You can open up." Relief flooded through her so powerfully she nearly dropped the rifle. She set it aside and fumbled with the door bar, yanking the door open. Ben stood there, blood splattered across his clothes but apparently uninjured. Behind him, He was dragging the carcass of an enormous mountain lion. "Got him," Ben said simply. Sarah launched herself at him, not caring about the blood or the cold air pouring into the cabin. She wrapped her arms around his neck and kissed him fiercely, all her fear and relief pouring into that kiss. "I was so scared," she whispered against his lips. "I know, I am sorry, but it had to be done." Ben held her close for a long moment, then gently disentangled himself. "Let me get cleaned up and deal with this carcass. The pelt will make a good rug, and we can use every part of the meat." That night, as they lay in bed with the mountain lion's pelt spread over their blankets for extra warmth, Sarah realized something important. She had been so worried that she would be a burden to Ben, that her leg would make her useless in this harsh environment. But today, she had kept the cabin safe while he hunted. She had held down their home base, kept the fire going, been ready to defend herself if needed. She had a role here. "She had value, Ben," she said softly into the darkness. "Yeah, thank you. For what? For bringing me here. For showing me I could be strong." She felt him smile against her hair. "Sarah, you were always strong. You just needed a place where you could see it for yourself." Winter closed in with a vengeance in December. Snow fell in earnest, piling up against the cabin walls until Ben had to shovel a path just to get to the wood pile. The temperature dropped so low that water left in a cup overnight would be solid ice by morning. They burned through firewood at an alarming rate, and Ben had to make trips out into the forest to cut more even in the worst weather. Sarah worried constantly during these trips. What if he got lost in a blizzard? What if he injured himself and could not make it back? What if the cold finally proved too much even for his mountain-hardened strength? But Ben always came back, sometimes half-frozen and exhausted, but always alive and determined. They developed a routine that helped pass the long winter months. Ben would wake early and get the fire built back up from overnight embers. They would eat breakfast together, usually some kind of porridge or fried cornmeal cakes. Then, Ben would do whatever outdoor work needed doing, checking his trap lines, hunting, cutting wood. Sarah would handle the indoor work, cooking, mending, keeping the cabin clean, working on crafts in the afternoons. They would often read together. Ben had a small collection of books that he had traded for over the years, and they read them aloud to each other to pass the time. Sarah's favorite was a collection of Shakespeare plays, though she also enjoyed the adventure novels Ben preferred. Evenings were their favorite time. They would cook dinner together, Ben doing the heavy work while Sarah handled the spices and seasonings. Then they would sit by the fire, sometimes talking, sometimes just sitting in comfortable silence. Ben would often work on carving or repairing his equipment while Sarah sewed or knitted. And at night, in their bed piled high with furs and blankets, they would make love and talk and dream about the future. Sarah found herself wondering what it would be like to bring a child into this world, to raise a baby in these wild mountains. The thought both thrilled and terrified her. "Do you want children?" she asked Ben one night in late January when the wind was howling outside and the cabin felt like the only warm, safe place in the entire world. Ben was quiet for a long moment, his hand absently stroking her hair. "I never really thought about it before I met you." Seemed like a thing that happened to other people, not to a man living alone in the mountains. But now, yeah, I do. I think about it a lot, actually. About you carrying my child, about teaching a son or daughter how to live in this place. Does that scare you? A little, Sarah admitted. What if something goes wrong? We are so far from any doctor or midwife. There is a trading post about 2 days' ride from here. Fellow who runs it, name of Jeremiah Walsh, his wife has helped birth babies for half the trappers and settlers in these mountains. When the time comes, we will get you to her, I promise. Sarah snuggled closer to him, taking comfort in his solid warmth. "I love you, Ben Colter." "I love you too, Sarah Colter." He pressed a kiss to her forehead. "More than I ever thought I could love anyone." Spring came slowly to the mountains. The snow began to melt in March, turning the creek from a trickle into a rushing torrent. The first wildflowers pushed up through the last patches of snow, brave splashes of color after months of white and gray. Birds returned, filling the forest with song. And Sarah realized with equal parts joy and terror that her monthly bleeding had not come in nearly 2 months. She waited another week to be sure, then told Ben one evening as they sat watching the sunset paint the mountain peaks gold and crimson. "I think I am with child," she said quietly. Ben's head whipped around so fast she heard his neck crack. "What? My courses have not come since January, and I have been feeling sick in the mornings, though I thought it was just something I ate." Sarah watched his face anxiously, trying to gauge his reaction. For a long moment, Ben just stared at her, his expression unreadable. Then slowly, a smile spread across his face, growing wider and brighter until he looked like he might burst from happiness. He let out a whoop and scooped Sarah up, spinning her around just like he had the day she agreed to marry him. "We are going to have a baby," he shouted to the mountains, his voice echoing off the slopes. "You hear that? I am going to be a father." Sarah laughed, tears streaming down her face caught up in his joy. "You are happy." "Happy. Sarah, I am over the moon, I am walking on clouds, I am the luckiest man alive." He set her down carefully, suddenly worried. "Are you all right? Is the baby all right? Should you be standing, sitting?" "What do you need?" "I am fine, Ben. Women have babies all the time, I am not made of glass." But Ben fussed over her anyway, insisting she rest more, do less heavy work, eat the best portions of food. Sarah found it both endearing and occasionally frustrating. She was pregnant, not dying. But she let him fuss because she understood it came from love and concern. As her belly began to swell with their child, Sarah found herself falling even more deeply in love with the mountains. This wild place would be her child's first home. These forests and streams would be the playground where her son or daughter would learn to walk and explore. It was a good life, she realized. A hard life, yes, but good and honest and full of love. In June, Ben took her to the trading post to meet Jeremiah Walsh and his wife, Margaret. The journey took 3 days because they went slowly, mindful of Sarah's condition and her leg which ached more as the pregnancy progressed. But Margaret proved to be exactly what Sarah needed, a practical, no-nonsense woman in her 50s who had birthed 7 children of her own and helped deliver at least 2 dozen more. "You are healthy and strong," Margaret declared after examining Sarah. "That leg of yours might give you some trouble when it comes time to push, but we will work around it. Women have been having babies since the beginning of time, and they have done it with a lot worse challenges than a bum leg." Sarah felt a weight lift from her shoulders. Margaret's confidence was infectious, and for the first time, she truly believed everything would be all right. They stayed at the trading post for a week, stocking up on supplies and resting before the journey back. Sarah enjoyed having another woman to talk to, someone who understood the unique challenges of living in the wilderness. Margaret taught her recipes for cooking game meat, shared tricks for keeping a cabin warm in winter, and told her stories about the other trappers and their families scattered throughout the mountains. "You are lucky in your man," Margaret said one afternoon as they sat shelling peas together. "Ben Colter has always been a good sort, honest and hardworking, but I have never seen him as happy as he is now. You have changed him, Sarah, given him something to live for beyond just surviving." "He has changed me too," Sarah replied softly. "I was so lost before I met him. So convinced my life was over because of my leg. He showed me I was wrong." "That is what the right partner does," Margaret said with a smile. "They show you the best parts of yourself." When they returned to the cabin, Sarah felt renewed and ready to face the coming months. She spent the summer preparing for the baby, sewing tiny clothes and blankets, making sure they had plenty of clean cloth for diapers. Ben built a cradle from pine wood, carving it with care and sanding it smooth so no splinter would ever touch his child's skin. Sarah's belly grew round and heavy as the aspens began to turn gold again. She moved more slowly now, her damaged leg protesting the extra weight it had to carry. But Ben was always there to steady her, to help her up and down, to carry water and wood so she did not have to. "I am getting close," Sarah said one evening in late September. She was 9 months along now, and the baby was so active she could barely sleep. "Maybe another week or two. Then we should head to the trading post soon," Ben said. "I want Margaret there when you deliver. Want to make sure you have every possible help." They left 2 days later, taking their time on the trail. Sarah rode a gentle mare, her belly so large she could barely see her feet in the stirrups. Ben led them on the easiest paths he could find, constantly checking to make sure Sarah was comfortable. They were still a day away from the trading post when Sarah's water broke. She was dismounting for their midday rest when she felt a sudden gush of warm liquid. She looked down in confusion at the wet patch spreading across her dress, then at Ben. "I think the baby is coming." Ben went pale beneath his tan. "Now, here, I did not exactly plan it this way." Sarah tried to laugh, but it came out shaky. A contraction hit her, sharp and sudden, stealing her breath. Ben moved into action, his mountain man training overriding his panic. He got Sarah settled on their bedroll under a stand of pines, built a fire, and boiled water even though he was not entirely sure why. He held Sarah's hand through the contractions, which came faster and harder as the afternoon wore on. "I cannot do this," Sarah gasped during one particularly brutal contraction. "It hurts too much. My leg cannot support me to push. I cannot do this." "Yes, you can," Ben said fiercely, gripping her hand. "Sarah, you are the strongest person I know. You survived losing your father, breaking your leg, 3 years of poverty and loneliness. You crossed half the country to build a new life in the wilderness. You can damn well do this." His words gave her strength. When the urge to push came, she bore down with everything she had, Ben supporting her back and her bad leg. She pushed and screamed and cried and pushed some more, until she thought she would die from the effort. And then, as the sun was setting behind the mountains, painting the sky in shades of crimson and gold, their son slipped into the world. Ben caught the baby with shaking hands, clearing the infant's mouth and nose until the child let out a strong, angry wail. He wrapped their son in a clean blanket and placed him in Sarah's arms, tears streaming openly down his face. "You did it," he whispered, his voice choked with emotion. "Sarah, you did it. We have a son." Sarah looked down at the tiny, red-faced creature in her arms and felt her heart expand so much she thought it might burst. He was perfect, absolutely perfect, with a cap of dark hair and Ben's blue eyes already trying to focus on her face. "Hello, little one," she whispered. "We have been waiting for you." They stayed camped there for 3 days, giving Sarah time to rest and recover before attempting the rest of the journey. Ben was attentive to the point of obsession, constantly checking on both Sarah and the baby, making sure they had everything they needed. "What should we name him?" Sarah asked on the second day, as she nursed their son for what felt like the 100th time. Ben looked at the baby with such tenderness it made Sarah's heart ache. "I was thinking maybe Samuel, after my grandfather. He was a good man, strong and honest. Raised 6 kids and never raised his voice to any of them." "Samuel Colter," Sarah tested the name. "I like it. Samuel Benjamin Colter, perfect. Ben leaned over to kiss first Sarah, then baby Samuel's forehead. Absolutely perfect. When they finally made it to the trading post, Margaret took one look at Sarah and the baby and started fussing over them like a mother hen. She examined them both thoroughly, declared them remarkably healthy considering the circumstances, and insisted they stay for at least 2 weeks to fully recover. "You gave birth in the wilderness with no help but your husband," Margaret said, shaking her head in amazement. "Sarah Colter, you are tougher than a pine knot." Word spread among the scattered mountain community about the birth, and over the next few weeks, trappers and their families stopped by to meet the new arrival and offer congratulations. Sarah was surprised by how warm and welcoming everyone was, how quickly they accepted her and Samuel as part of their community. When they finally returned to their cabin in late October, Sarah felt like they were returning to a true home, not just a building. This was where her family lived. This was where her son would grow up. This was where she belonged. The winter that followed was harder than the first, simply because now they had Samuel to care for. Babies were demanding creatures, needing to be fed and changed and held constantly. Sarah was exhausted from nursing and lack of sleep. Her leg ached worse than ever from carrying the extra weight and the strain of pregnancy. There were nights when she cried from sheer exhaustion, when she wondered if she had the strength to keep going. But Ben was there through it all, taking Samuel when Sarah needed to rest, walking the floor with the baby when he would not sleep, changing diapers without complaint. He sang to their son in his deep, rumbling voice, lullabies his own mother had sung to him. He told Samuel stories about the mountains and the animals and the adventures they would have together someday. And slowly, as winter eased into spring, it got easier. Samuel began sleeping longer stretches at night. He started smiling and cooing, responding to his parents with obvious delight. Sarah's body recovered from the pregnancy, and her leg, while still damaged, adjusted to the demands placed on it. One warm afternoon in May, when Samuel was about 8 months old, Sarah stood outside the cabin watching Ben teach their son to reach for a pine cone. Samuel sat on a blanket in the grass, his chubby hands grasping for the object just out of reach while Ben encouraged him. "Come on, Sam, you can do it. Just a little farther." Samuel lunged forward and grabbed the pine cone, immediately trying to put it in his mouth. Ben laughed and gently took it away, earning an indignant squawk from his son. Sarah watched them together and felt her heart overflow with love. This was her life now. This rough cabin, these majestic mountains, this beautiful family. It was nothing like the life she had imagined for herself growing up in St. Louis. It was better. "Sarah," Ben called out, waving her over. "Come sit with us." She limped across the grass, her bad leg dragging slightly as it always did. But here, in this place with these people, her limp did not matter. It was just part of who she was, no more significant than the color of her eyes or the length of her hair. Ben pulled her down beside him on the blanket, Samuel immediately crawling into her lap with happy babbling. She held her son close, breathing in his sweet baby smell while Ben's arm came around her shoulders. "Are you happy?" Ben asked softly, his eyes searching her face. "Happier than I ever thought possible," Sarah replied honestly. "Sometimes I think about what my life would have been if you had not caught me that day in the market. I probably would still be in St. Louis, alone and miserable, scrubbing other people's laundry until I died." "Well, I am damn glad I was there," Ben said. He pressed a kiss to her temple. "You and Samuel are the best things that ever happened to me." The years passed with the changing seasons. Samuel grew from a baby into a curious, energetic boy who loved exploring the mountains with his father. He learned to track animals, to fish in the creek, to recognize the signs of changing weather. He was fearless and strong, but also gentle, treating the small creatures he found with careful reverence. When Samuel was 3, Sarah became pregnant again. This time the pregnancy was easier, perhaps because she knew what to expect. And this time, they made it to Margaret at the trading post well before the baby was due. Their daughter, Rebecca Grace, was born on a snowy December morning in 1876. She had Sarah's gray-green eyes and Ben's dark hair, and from the moment she arrived, she had both her parents wrapped around her tiny finger. Samuel was enchanted by his baby sister, constantly wanting to help care for her. He would bring her treasures from his explorations: smooth river stones, pretty feathers, wildflowers in the summer. Rebecca would coo at him with delight, and Sarah would watch her children together and feel overwhelmed with gratitude. Life in the mountains was never easy. There were harsh winters and failed gardens and lean times when game was scarce. There were injuries and illnesses and frightening close calls with wildlife. Sarah's leg continued to give her trouble, some days better than others. There were times when she could barely walk, when the pain was so intense she could barely think. But through it all, Ben was there. When her leg was bad, he carried her. When she was discouraged, he reminded her of her strength. When she felt isolated from the rest of the world, he held her and told her she was exactly where she belonged. And he never, not once, made her feel like her limp was a burden. If anything, he seemed to love that part of her as much as any other. "It is part of your story," he told her once. "It is proof that you survived something that could have killed you. I would never want you to hide that." As their children grew, Sarah taught them to read and write, using Ben's small library and the books they traded for at the trading post. She taught Rebecca to sew and cook, and Samuel to treat people with kindness and respect. Ben taught them both to shoot and trap and survive in the wilderness, but also to respect the land and take only what they needed. When Samuel was 10 and Rebecca 7, Ben finally convinced Sarah to let him take them all on an extended trip to St. Louis. Sarah had not been back to the city since they left 12 years earlier, and she was nervous about returning. What if people still remembered her? What if they looked at her children with pity because of her damaged leg? But she need not have worried. St. Louis had grown and changed dramatically in the years since she left. It was a real city now, bustling and modern, full of strangers who did not know or care about her past. They stayed for a month, visiting the market where Ben and Sarah had first met, showing the children the Mississippi River and the busy streets. Samuel and Rebecca were fascinated by the city, but also clearly uncomfortable with so many people crowded together. "When can we go home?" Rebecca asked after 2 weeks, her homesickness obvious. "Soon, sweetheart," Sarah promised, understanding completely. She was ready to go home too, back to their quiet valley and their simple life. On their last day in the city, Sarah convinced Ben to walk with her to the old market square. They stood hand in the spot where he had first caught her from falling, where Mrs. Hartwell had made her cruel comment, where Ben had declared he would walk slower and hold her hand tight. "You ever regret it?" Sarah asked softly. "Giving up your freedom to be tied down with a wife and children?" Ben looked at her like she had lost her mind. "Regret it? Sarah, marrying you was the best decision I ever made. You and our children are my whole world. I would not change a single thing, not one moment of the last 12 years. Sarah reached up to cup his bearded cheek, her eyes shining with tears. "I love you, Bennett Colter." "I love you too, Sarah Colter." He leaned down to kiss her, right there in the market square, not caring who saw. They returned to their mountain home in the fall of 1882, and life continued in its steady rhythm. Sarah kept the cabin warm and welcoming. Ben hunted and trapped and provided for his family. Their children grew tall and capable, learning the skills they would need to survive in the wilderness. When Samuel was 16, a young woman named Emma came to the mountains with her trapper father. Samuel took one look at her and fell head over heels in love. Sarah watched her son court Emma with the same fierce devotion Ben had shown her, and she saw the cycle beginning again. "He reminds me of you," Sarah told Ben one night as they watched Samuel and Emma walk together by the creek. "The way he looks at her, like she is the only person in the world." "He learned from the best," Ben replied with a grin. "I still look at you that way, and it was true." After nearly 15 years of marriage, Ben still looked at Sarah with the same love and wonder he had shown that first day in the market. He still held her hand when they walked together. He still matched his pace to hers without complaint. He still made her feel cherished and valued every single day. Samuel and Emma married the following summer in a ceremony at the trading post. The whole mountain community turned out for the celebration, and Sarah stood beside Ben watching their son pledge his life to the woman he loved, feeling the weight of time and memory pressing on her heart. "We are getting old," she murmured to Ben as they danced together under the stars. "Speak for yourself," Ben replied with mock offense. "I am in my prime." Sarah laughed and swatted his arm, but looking at him, she could see the truth. His dark hair was now liberally streaked with silver. There were deep lines around his eyes and mouth. His body, while still strong and muscular, moved with the slight stiffness of middle age. She supposed she looked older too. Her face was thinner, more lined from years of mountain sun and wind. Her hands were rough from work, her body softer from bearing children. And her leg, always her leg, had only gotten worse with age. Some days she could barely walk at all, but Ben still looked at her like she was the most beautiful woman he had ever seen. And that was all that mattered. Rebecca proved to be more cautious than her brother when it came to love. She was content to stay home with her parents, helping Sarah with the endless work of mountain living and learning everything Ben could teach her about surviving in the wilderness. She could shoot as well as any man, trap and skin animals, track game for miles. She was fierce and independent and in no hurry to tie herself down to marriage. "She reminds me of you," Ben told Sarah one winter evening when Rebecca was 18, not willing to settle for anything less than what she really wants. "I hope she finds what we have," Sarah said softly. "I hope she finds someone who will love her exactly as she is." "She will," Ben assured her. "Our daughter is too smart and too stubborn to accept anything less." Time continued its inexorable march forward. Samuel and Emma had 3 children of their own, giving Ben and Sarah grandchildren who would sometimes come visit the cabin. Sarah loved those visits, loved seeing the next generation running through the forests that had been her refuge for so many years. But as she entered her 40s and then her 50s, Sarah found herself slowing down. Her leg, always damaged, finally began to fail her completely. Some days she could not stand at all without screaming pain. She had to use a walking stick, and even then, the simplest tasks became monumental challenges. Ben watched his wife struggle and it broke his heart. He took over more and more of the work, trying to spare her as much as possible. He carried her when she needed to go somewhere. He brought the world to her when she could not go to it. "I am sorry," Sarah said one night, tears streaming down her face. "I am such a burden to you now." "You stop that right now," Ben said fiercely, taking her face in his hands. "You listen to me, Sarah Colter. You have never been a burden to me. Not the day I met you in that market, not on our wedding day, not when we climbed into these mountains, not when you gave birth to our children, and sure as hell not now. You are my wife. You are my partner. You are the love of my life. Taking care of you is not a burden, it is a privilege." But I can barely walk anymore. I cannot help you with the work. I just sit here useless while you do everything." "You are not useless." Ben's voice was gentle but firm. "You keep this cabin warm and welcoming. You teach our grandchildren when they visit. You are the heart of this family, Sarah. That has never been about what you could or could not do with your leg. It has always been about who you are as a person." Sarah cried into his shoulder while he held her. This man who had loved her unconditionally for more than 30 years, who had never once made her feel less than because of her damaged leg. Rebecca eventually married a young trapper named Daniel Morrison when she was 23. It was a good match, Daniel clearly adoring Rebecca and respecting her independence. They built a cabin about a day's ride from Ben and Sarah's place, close enough to visit regularly but far enough to have their own space. Ben and Sarah settled into the peaceful rhythm of old age. They were in their 50s now, grandparents many times over, their bodies marked by years of hard living. But they were together, and that was all that mattered. On a cool autumn evening in 1897, Ben and Sarah sat together on the porch of their cabin, watching the sun set behind the mountains. Sarah's hair was completely gray now, pulled back in a simple bun. Ben's beard was nearly white, and he moved with the stiffness of old injuries and hard work. But his hand was warm and strong in hers, just as it had always been. "You remember the day we met?" Sarah asked softly. "Every detail," Ben replied. "You were trying so hard to be invisible, to not let those awful people see how their words hurt you, but I saw it, and I saw the strength it took for you to keep your head up anyway. I was so shocked when you defended me. No one had ever done that before." "Best decision I ever made," Ben said, squeezing her hand. "Walking up to you, offering to walk you home, changed my whole life." "Mine too." Sarah leaned her head on his shoulder, her bad leg stretched out stiffly in front of her. "Thank you, Ben, for everything. For loving me when no one else would. For bringing me here. For giving me a family and a home. For never making me feel like my limp was something to be ashamed of." "Thank you for saying yes," Ben replied. "For taking a chance on a rough mountain man who did not have much to offer except his heart. For giving me children and making this cabin into a home. For showing me what it means to truly love someone." They sat in companionable silence as the stars began to emerge overhead, the same stars that had watched over them for more than 25 years in these mountains. Their children were grown and settled, their grandchildren were thriving, and they had lived a good life together despite all the challenges. "I would not change anything," Sarah said finally. "Not one moment of it. Even the hard parts, even the pain. It all led to this to us, and that makes it all worth it." "Neither would I," Ben agreed. He turned to kiss her temple just as he had done thousands of times before. "I love you, Sarah, until my last breath and beyond." "I love you too," Sarah whispered. They remained on the porch until full darkness fell. Two old souls who had found each other against all odds and built a life together in the wild mountains. A life marked by hardship and sacrifice, yes, but also by love and devotion and the unshakable knowledge that they were exactly where they belonged. Years continued to pass, marked by the changing seasons and the cycle of life in the mountains. Ben and Sarah grew older, their bodies failing but their love remaining strong. They celebrated 40 years of marriage in 1912, surrounded by children and grandchildren and even a few great-grandchildren, a testament to the life they had built together. Sarah's leg finally gave out completely when she was 65. She could no longer walk at all without intense pain, and Ben carried her everywhere she needed to go. He was 70 by then, his own body worn down by decades of hard work, but he never complained. She was light as a bird anyway, he said, and carrying her was no trouble at all. They spent their final years together in the cabin they had shared for over 4 decades, watching their family grow and thrive. Ben would carry Sarah outside on good days so she could feel the sun on her face and watch the birds in the trees. They would sit together for hours, sometimes talking, sometimes just existing in companionable silence, their hands always linked together. Ben Colter died peacefully in his sleep on a cold January night in 1918, at the age of 76. Sarah woke to find him beside her, his weathered face peaceful, his hand still holding hers even in death. She held him for a long time, memorizing every line and angle of the face she had loved for 46 years, crying silent tears for the loss of her partner, her protector, her great love. Their children buried him on a ridge overlooking the valley, with a simple wooden cross marking his grave. Sarah insisted on being there despite her inability to walk, and Samuel carried his mother up the mountain trail just as Ben had carried her so many times before. "He was a good man," Sarah said softly as they lowered Ben into the ground. "The best man. He loved me when no one else would. He saw past my damaged leg to the person inside. He gave me a life I never dreamed possible. He loved you until his last breath," Rebecca said, her arm around her mother's shoulders. "That is the greatest gift anyone can give." Sarah lived for 6 more months after Ben's death. Without him, she faded quickly, her will to go on diminishing without her partner by her side. She spent her final days in the cabin they had shared, surrounded by children and grandchildren, telling stories about the mountain man who had walked slower and held her hand tight. She died on a warm July evening in 1918, just as the sun was setting behind the mountains in a blaze of crimson and gold. Her last words were Ben, and her children knew she was seeing him waiting for her on the other side. They buried Sarah beside her husband on that mountain ridge, their graves side by side, just as they had slept side by side for over 40 years. Their children carved their names into the wooden crosses, simple but lasting memorials to 2 people who had loved each other completely and built a legacy that would endure for generations. And on quiet evenings when the wind blows through the pines and the sun sets behind the Medicine Bow Range, locals swear you can sometimes see 2 figures walking hand in hand through the valley, an old man matching his pace to the slower gait of the woman beside him, their love transcending even death itself. Their story became legend in the mountain community, passed down through generations as an example of what true love looks like. Not the easy kind of love that only exists when things are perfect, but the hard-won love that endures through every challenge and never wavers. The kind of love that sees past surface imperfections to the soul beneath. The kind of love that says, "If you limp, I will walk slower and hold your hand tight." Samuel and Emma's children grew up hearing the story of how their grandparents met, how a rough mountain man had stood up for a limping woman in a market square and changed both their lives forever. They told the story to their own children, who told it to theirs, keeping alive the memory of Ben and Sarah Colter. The cabin eventually fell into disrepair, reclaimed by the forest as all things eventually are. But the legacy they built there endured, a testament to the power of love to overcome any obstacle, to the strength of 2 people choosing each other every single day, to the simple but profound truth that real love sees the person, not their limitations. And somewhere in those wild mountains, in the valley where they built their life together, their love story continues to echo through the wind in the pines, a reminder that true love exists for those brave enough to claim it and strong enough to hold on tight, no matter what challenges may come.